I never planned to work nights at a children's hospital. If I'm being honest, I never planned to work in a hospital at all. But life doesn't ask for plans. It pushes, it corners, and sometimes it leaves you standing in front of a rusted set of double doors at 11:30 at night, staring at your own reflection in the glass, trying to convince yourself that this dimly lit building will somehow make things better. That was me 2 months ago. The posting was vague. Night attendant needed. Children's ward. Must be comfortable working alone. No experience required. The kind of listing most people would scroll past without a second glance. But I wasn't most people. Not then. I needed money. I needed distance from everything else in my life. And I needed silence. Hospitals promise silence at night. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The interview was a joke. A tired-looking woman in a gray cardigan skimmed my resume and asked if I could stay awake until dawn without falling asleep. I said yes. She handed me a badge. No drug test, no background check, not even a tour of the building. Just be here by midnight, she said, and don't expect much company. I should have felt lucky. Instead, I felt uneasy. Locals in town didn't help. The few people I mentioned it to gave me that look, that fleeting flicker in their eyes, like they wanted to say something, then swallowed it instead. One cashier muttered, "They never keep people long in that ward," before bagging my groceries a little too quickly. Another simply said, "Be careful," like I was leaving for war instead of work. I thought it was superstition. Small towns breed it like mold in damp corners. Still, I showed up early for my first shift. I parked in the farthest corner of the lot, beneath a buzzing street lamp that barely clung to life. The hospital loomed above me, too tall for a building that size, its windows reflecting nothing but black sky. Inside, the air was cold enough to sting my teeth when I breathed. The lobby lights were dim, half of them dead, and the silence was thick, too thick. Like the air wasn't empty, but waiting. The children's ward was on the 5th floor. I remember the elevator ride because it was the longest 30 seconds of my life. The overhead bulb flickered as if trying to go out, and I kept catching my reflection in the metal doors. Pale face, hollow eyes, the look of someone who didn't belong there. When the doors opened, I was greeted by nothing, just a long corridor stretching both directions, lined with doors painted a fading blue, the kind of color meant to soothe children. But under fluorescent light, it looked sickly. That was when I heard it. A voice, small, fragile, "Father." It came from somewhere down the hall. I froze, waiting for someone else to answer. A nurse? Maybe. A doctor making late rounds. But no footsteps followed. No shuffling of papers. No doors opening. Just silence. Then again, a little louder. "Father." This time it was unmistakably a child's voice. But it wasn't calling out in fear. It wasn't even calling for help. It sounded expectant, like the child knew I would come. I told myself children call out for their parents all the time in hospitals. They dream, they cry, they mumble. Nothing strange about that, except they didn't say dad. They didn't say daddy. They said father. I stood there too long, listening, my badge cold against my chest. Then I shook it off. First night nerves. Echoes through vents. Maybe someone left a TV on. I told myself all those things, but the truth is, deep down, something already felt wrong, and I hadn't even started my shift. The first night wasn't supposed to begin with a set of instructions. When I reached the nurse's station, at the far end of the 5th floor, there was only one person there, an older man, slouched in a rolling chair, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that smelled faintly of burnt sugar. He looked like he had been carved out of the same wall's gray hollow, worn smooth by years of repetition. "You're the new night watch?" he asked, without standing. His voice was raspy, as if he'd been speaking through smoke all his life. I nodded, holding out my badge like a peace offering. He didn't take it. He just gestured for me to sit in the empty chair across the counter. "My name's Ellis," he said. "I'll keep this simple, since you look like the type who doesn't need fluff. This ward has rules. You follow them, you'll be fine. You don't, you won't last." I almost laughed. The way he said it was too dry, too theatrical, like a camp counselor telling ghost stories by a fire. But his eyes didn't blink, and his hands gripped the mug so tightly his knuckles turned white. He slid a folded sheet of paper across the desk. The paper was yellowed, as if it had been handled 1,000 times before. The ink was smudged, but legible. At the top, in block letters, was a single line: 5th floor night shift roulette. He hesitated, then unfolded it. The list was short, but each line seemed heavier than it should have been. Rule 1. Never enter room 509. If you hear noises from inside, ignore them. The door must remain locked. Rule 2. If a child calls you father, do not answer. Do not speak. Do not look into their eyes. Continue walking. Rule 3. Between 2 o'clock and 2:15 a.m., remain at the nurse's station. No matter what you hear, no matter what alarms sound, do not leave until the time has passed. Rule 4. If you see a woman in white standing at the end of the corridor, turn around and walk the other way. Do not acknowledge her. Do not run. Rule 5. At exactly 3:33 a.m., check every room. Even if the children are sleeping, wake them and ask if they are all right. If one does not respond, leave the room immediately and close the door behind you. Rule 6. When dawn breaks and the intercom plays the morning chime, leave the ward without delay. Do not stay to speak with staff. Do not look back at the 5th floor once you exit the elevator. I read them twice, maybe 3 times, waiting for the punchline. Ellis just sipped his coffee, watching me over the rim of his mug. "You're serious?" I finally asked. He nodded once. "This is some kind of hazing thing. Tradition. To spook the new guy." He didn't smile. "You think I'd waste my breath writing jokes?" Something in his tone made my throat dry. "Look, I don't buy into this stuff," I said, trying to sound steadier than I felt. "I've worked plenty of nights. I know people get superstitious, especially around hospitals. Lights flicker, kids cry, doors creak. Doesn't mean there's a rule book for it." Ellis set his mug down with a soft clink. "You don't have to believe me. You just have to obey." The way he said obey sent a prickle down my spine. I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket, mostly to humor him. He didn't argue. He just leaned back and closed his eyes, as if the matter was settled. The rest of the ward was unnervingly quiet. I walked the hall once, glancing into the rooms. Each child was asleep, their small forms bundled under blankets, their faces pale beneath the weak light. Machines hummed softly. Monitors blinked green. Nothing unusual. And yet, when I passed room 509, I noticed the door was different, heavier, reinforced. A padlock glinted beneath the handle. My reflection wavered faintly in the small window. The blinds were drawn tight from inside, but I thought I saw movement in the shadows. I kept walking. The rest of the night dragged. I found myself staring at the clock more than anything else, counting down the hours. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of air through the vents seemed amplified. Twice I heard it again, the soft, lilting voice of a child calling father. The first time, it came from a room I had just checked. The second time, it came from directly behind me, though when I turned, the corridor was empty. I remembered the second rule: do not answer. Do not look into their eyes. And even though I wanted to scoff, to roll my eyes at Ellis and his paper rules, I didn't answer. Not because I believed, but because I didn't trust what my own voice might sound like in that silence. When 6 a.m. came, a soft chime played over the intercom, not a normal tone, more like a lullaby played too slowly. The hair on my arms rose instantly. Ellis stood, gathering his things. "Don't linger," he said, as though reminding me of a courtesy I should already know. He didn't wait for me. He stepped into the elevator and vanished without another word. I followed soon after, and I'll admit, when the doors slid shut, I didn't look back at the 5th floor. By the 3rd night, I had convinced myself the rules were nothing but superstition. I followed them, sure, but only because there was no reason not to. Staying put during those 15 minutes at 2 a.m., fine. Checking every room at 3:33, annoying, but doable. Ignoring the word father when a child mumbled in their sleep, easy enough. Ellis barely spoke to me anymore. He shuffled in, drank his coffee, reminded me not to slip up, then spent the rest of the shift with his eyes half closed behind the desk. The man was like a fossil, glued to that chair. The problem started on my 4th night. It was around 1:45 a.m. The ward was quiet, too quiet. Usually by then at least one of the kids would murmur in their sleep, roll over, trigger a monitor beep, but that night, the silence pressed against my ears until I couldn't ignore it, so I got up. I told myself I was just stretching my legs, but really, I was restless. The corridor stretched ahead of me, pale blue walls glowing under the fluorescent bulbs. My footsteps echoed softly. When I passed room 509, I paused. The door was locked, as always, the blinds drawn tight, but for the first time, I heard something from inside, not voices, not movement. It was humming, a low, steady hum, like someone singing to themselves. It wasn't cheerful, it wasn't sad, it was something in between, the kind of tune that sticks in your teeth because it doesn't quite resolve. I leaned closer before I realized what I was doing. My hand brushed the door frame, and for a moment, I almost reached for the handle. Then I remembered Rule 1, never enter room 509. My pulse thudded. I stepped back quickly, as if someone on the other side could see me. That should have been the end of it, but a WASN single quotes, because 15 minutes later, just as the clock struck 2 a.m., the alarms went off, all of them. Every monitor in the ward screamed at once, piercing beeps that echoed down the corridor. The heart monitor, the 4 pumps, even machines that hadn't made a sound in days. Lights flashed red above the doors. I froze. My instinct screamed to move, to run into the nearest room, to check the children. But then I remembered Rule 3. Between 2 o'clock and 2:15, remain at the nurse's station. No matter what you hear, no matter what alarms sound. I stood halfway down the hall, paralyzed. The children were in there. What if something was actually wrong? What if they needed me? Help me. The words were faint, but I heard them clear as glass. They came from room 512, a boy's voice, weak and trembling. I took one step forward, then another. The alarms screamed louder, as if punishing me for moving. My stomach twisted. The hallway seemed longer than it should have been, stretching like elastic. When I was only a few feet from the door, I glanced back at the nurse's station. Ellis was watching me, not moving, not saying a word, just staring. His face was expressionless, but his knuckles were white again around his mug. The second I saw him, something inside me snapped back into place. I bolted for the station, nearly tripping over my own shoes. I collapsed into the chair just as the digital clock flipped from 2:14 to 2:15, and, instantly silence. The alarms cut out mid-beep. The red lights flickered once, then died. Every monitor returned to normal readings. Every machine went still. I sat there, gasping, sweat rolling down my spine. Ellis finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't break the rules. He didn't say you almost did. He didn't say good job for stopping yourself. He said it like I already had. I didn't argue. I didn't move. I stayed glued to that chair until the clock crawled forward again. But that night, I didn't shake it off as nerves. Because when I checked room 512 later, the boy inside was fast asleep. His monitor steady, his chest rising and falling calmly, and yet his lips were moving faintly, whispering a word over and over, like a prayer. Father, Father, Father. By the 6th night, the rules weren't a joke anymore. I still wanted them to be. I still wanted to chalk everything up to exhaustion and superstition. But after the alarms, after the boy in room 512 whispering that word in his sleep, I couldn't ignore it. Not completely. I told myself I would just follow along, obey the rules, keep my head down, finish my shifts, and collect my paycheck. That was all. But of course, the hospital had other plans. It happened just past midnight. I was making my first round of the night, walking the length of the corridor. The lights buzzed faintly above me, and the smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. Most of the rooms were quiet. The children slept soundly. A few murmured in their dreams, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then I reached room 506. The door was slightly open, just a crack. I knew I had shut it earlier. My pulse jumped, but I told myself maybe Ellis had gone in. Maybe he'd forgotten to pull it closed. I nudged it gently with my fingertips. The child inside, a little girl with tangled brown hair, was sitting upright in bed. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on me the moment the door creaked wider, and she smiled. Not the sleepy, dazed smile of a child half awake. No, this smile was sharp, intentional. Father, she whispered. My blood went cold. Rule 2. If a child calls you father, do not answer. Do not look into their eyes. I froze. Her gaze locked with mine, unblinking. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch toward me, long and thin. Father, she said again, louder this time. The smile never faltered. I forced myself to step back. My throat burned with the urge to respond, to tell her no. She was mistaken. I wasn't her father. But I clenched my jaw shut so hard it hurt. Her voice rose. Father, Father, Father. The fluorescent light above the bed flickered violently. The heart monitor beside her beeped out of rhythm, stuttering like it was choking on its own signal. I stumbled back into the hall, my chest tight, eyes burning from not blinking, and then silence. When I dared to look again, the door had swung shut on its own. The light inside the room steadied. The monitor beeped normally. I stood there, shaking, my nails digging crescents into my palms. Ellis appeared at the far end of the hall, his silhouette stiff under the dim glow. He didn't hurry. He didn't even look surprised. He just approached slowly, his mug in one hand, as though he'd been expecting it. She spoke to you, didn't she? He said. I didn't answer. My voice was still locked in my throat. Don't ever look them in the eyes when they call you that, he said. You're not their father, but they'll try to make you believe you are. That's how it begins. His words sank into me like ice. That's how it begins. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to demand why the children said it, why they smiled like that, why the hospital even kept them here. But something in his face stopped me. His expression wasn't stern or angry. It was tired, defeated, like a man who'd asked those same questions once and hated the answers. He walked away without another word. The rest of the night was unbearable. Every door I passed felt like it was watching me. Every shadow seemed to pulse with the weight of that single word. Father, at 3:33 a.m., I checked the rooms like the rules demanded. My hands trembled on every doorknob. Every child I woke startled me, even when they just rubbed their eyes or groaned sleepily. But in the back of my mind, I kept hearing her voice, that word, and I knew this wasn't superstition anymore. The rules weren't warnings, they were survival. By my second week, I couldn't take the silence anymore. The rules were one thing, the whispers, the alarms, the children calling me father, those were bad enough. But it was the not knowing that gnawed at me. The unanswered questions. The way Ellis avoided my eyes whenever I asked anything that wasn't strictly about the shift. So I started digging that first. It was little things. Notes left at the nurse's station. Faded papers stuffed into drawers. Most were routine reports charts, dosage logs, standard hospital paperwork. But every so often, something odd slipped through. A patient file with no diagnosis listed. A medical chart with entire sections blacked out. A shift report that ended mid-sentence. Pen dragging off the page as though someone had been interrupted. And always, the dates. The files stretched back decades. Too many decades. The hospital was old. Sure, but the children's ward hadn't changed in 50 years. Same rooms. Same blue paint on the doors. Same reinforced lock on room 509. The deeper I looked, the stranger it became. One night, I found a folder wedged behind the radiator in the staff lounge. The paper was yellowed, the corners eaten away by dust. Inside were incident reports, all from night shifts. Patient in room 504, repeated word father over 200 times in 1 hour. No father on record. Nurse removed from shift after fainting. Unidentified woman in white gown, observed by 3 staff members simultaneously. Disappeared when approached. No patient matching description admitted at the time. At 3:33 a.m., multiple patients unresponsive. Staff reports shadowy figures in corners of rooms. Survivors instructed not to speak of incident. The date stretched back to the 70s. Names of staff were crossed out in heavy ink, and every report ended with the same line: follow the rules. That night, I couldn't focus on my rounds. The paper burned in my pocket like a coal. When I finally sat down at the nurse's station, Ellis was watching me. His eyes weren't tired tonight. They were sharp. "You've been looking where you shouldn't," he said. It wasn't a question. I swallowed. "I need to know. What is this place? What are those kids?" Ellis didn't answer at first. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if trying to measure how much truth I could handle. Finally, he spoke. "This floor doesn't belong to the hospital anymore." "Not really. It hasn't for a long time." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He rubbed his temple. "You think these are patients?" "They're not. Not in the way you think. Their bodies, yes, they're real. But what's inside them doesn't belong here. It's older, hungrier." My skin prickled. "They call you father," Ellis continued softly, "because they're always looking for one. A vessel. Someone to take the place of what they've lost. And if you let them, if you answer, they'll make you theirs." I stared at him, waiting for a smirk, some sign he was pulling my leg. But there was none. "Why stay then?" I asked. "Why keep working here if you know all that?" His expression twisted. Not anger, not sadness. Something closer to resignation. Because leaving isn't as simple as walking out the door. Once you've been here long enough, you'll understand. The rules aren't to protect the children, they're to protect you from them. I wanted to press further, to demand how long he had been here, why no one outside the hospital seemed to talk about it, why this place still operated at all. But before I could speak, the intercom crackled. It wasn't the morning chime. It wasn't even an alarm. It was a voice, a child's voice. "Father," it whispered through every speaker on the ward. The sound slid through me like ice water. Every door in the corridor rattled at once, hinges groaning as if something inside was pushing against them. The monitors beeped erratically. Ellis slammed his fist against the desk. Ignore it, but I couldn't. Because even as the voice repeated "Father, Father," I realized something. It wasn't one child speaking. It was all of them. Every single child on the 5th floor was whispering the same word, in perfect unison. Afterward, when the noise finally stopped, I couldn't sit still. I left the desk, pacing the hall, my skin crawling with every step. At the far end of the corridor, I noticed something I hadn't before. A door, half hidden by a cart of supplies. Not numbered like the others, unmarked. I pushed the cart aside. The door was locked, of course. But unlike 509, it had no padlock. just a standard knob with a keyhole. I don't know what came over me, but I pressed my ear to it. At first, nothing, just silence, then a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across the other side of the wood. I staggered back. That night, after the shift ended, I didn't leave right away. I broke Rule 6. I lingered. I crept into the archives in the basement. Dust, thick on the shelves, boxers stacked like coffins. It took hours, but I found them. Old newspaper clippings, photos. The children's hospital had burned down in 1954. Entire 5th floor destroyed. 24 children trapped inside, along with 3 staff members. None survived, and yet here I was, walking the halls of the 5th floor, hearing their voices, watching them breathe in their beds. The article ended with a single chilling line: "The wing will remain sealed indefinitely. Reconstruction is not recommended." I dropped the paper and stumbled out, heart hammering so hard it hurt. When I returned to the 5th floor, Ellis was waiting. He looked at me the way you look at someone who has already gone too far. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. "Now they know you're curious, and they love curious ones." I thought I had prepared myself after the files, the clippings, the whispers. I thought I knew what to expect. Ghosts, spirits, hallucinations from lack of sleep. Something explainable, or at least containable, but the night it finally came for me, I realized how wrong I was. It started at exactly 3:33 a.m. I'd been pacing the hall, dreading the nightly ritual. The rule demanded I check every room, wake every child, ask if they were all right. Usually they stirred, muttered, groaned, then drifted back to sleep. Unnerving, yes, but never dangerous. That night was different. The first 2 rooms were silent, too silent. The children didn't stir when I shook them gently. Their eyes stayed shut, their bodies limp but breathing. The monitors beeped steady, but something about the rhythm was wrong. Too uniform, too perfect. By the 3rd room, my chest was tight. The girl inside didn't respond either. I touched her shoulder, ice cold. When I leaned closer, her lips twitched. She whispered one word: "Father." I jerked back, heart hammering, but before I could retreat, her eyes snapped open. They weren't human eyes. Not really. Too dark, too wide, the pupils stretching far beyond natural limits. And they didn't blink. They just stared, swallowing me whole. "Father," she repeated, louder. The monitor beside her flatlined. I bolted into the hall. The door slammed shut behind me on its own. For a moment, the corridor was silent again. My breath came ragged, echoing off the pale blue walls. Then, from every room at once, voices rose. "Father, Father, Father." The word pounded in rhythm with my pulse. The doors rattled, hinges straining. Lights flickered wildly overhead, plunging the hall into stuttering darkness. And then I saw her dot at the far end of the corridor. The woman in white. Her dress was old-fashioned, tattered at the hem. Her hair hung black and stringy across her face. She stood perfectly still, hands folded in front of her, head tilted slightly, as though listening. Rule 4. If you see a woman in white standing at the end of the corridor, turn around and walk the other way. Do not acknowledge her. Do not run. But it's one thing to read a rule on paper. It's another to stand frozen while every instinct screams at you to flee. Her head tilted further. A sharp, unnatural angle. The bones of her neck cracked audibly even from where I stood. I forced myself to turn, my legs trembling beneath me. Step by step, I walked the other way, refusing to look back. But the voices followed. "Father, Father, Father." They grew louder, closer, until it felt like they were whispering directly into my ears. I pressed my hands against the sides of my head, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me, vibrating through my skull. Halfway down the corridor, I risked a glance. The woman in white was closer, no longer at the far end, She stood only a dozen feet away, her face still hidden, her body impossibly still. I stumbled forward, biting down on the scream, clawing at my throat. The lights above me flickered again, plunging everything into darkness for a full second. When they came back on, she was standing right in front of me. Her face was wrong. Too smooth, two pale eyes, like deep sockets carved into porcelain. And her mouth stretched far wider than it should, splitting her cheeks, opening in a soundless scream. I broke the rule. I ran. The corridor twisted around me, stretching impossibly long. Doors blurred past, children's voices chasing me, their cries echoing off the walls. I didn't care. I couldn't care. I just needed to escape. Behind me, her footsteps began, slow, deliberate, the sharp click of bone on tile. They didn't rush, but every step landed closer than it should have. The elevator. My only thought was the elevator. I reached it, slamming the call button over and over. The doors creaked open an inch, then stopped. Jammed. I spun around. She was there, at the other end of the hall, again. Still as stone, watching, waiting. The voices hushed all at once, and then every door opened. The children stepped out, dozens of them, moving in perfect silence, eyes wide, lips murmuring the same word, "Father." Their bare feet padded softly against the tile as they closed in, surrounding me. I pressed myself against the elevator doors, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. They formed a circle, their faces blank, their eyes dark. In unison, they raised their hands and pointed at me. "Father," they chanted, not whispers this time, chants, louder, louder. The woman in white stepped forward, her body jerking unnaturally with each movement, like a puppet pulled by strings. She raised one hand. The children fell silent, and she spoke for the first time. "You belong here." The words rattled through me, deeper than any human voice. They weren't spoken aloud, they were inside my chest, my bones. The floor trembled beneath me. The lights overhead shattered, plunging us into darkness. And in that darkness, I felt cold hands reaching for me, dozens of them, small, childlike, clutching at my arms, my legs, my throat. I screamed, thrashing wildly, shoving them off. But their grip was iron. Their whispers filled my skull until I thought it would split apart. Just when I thought I would vanish under them, a sharp sound split the air. A bell, the morning chime. Instantly, the hands let go. The children collapsed where they stood, limp as rag dolls. The woman in white flickered like a dying projection, then vanished completely. The lights buzzed back to life. The hall was empty. I slid to the floor, gasping, my body shaking so hard I could barely move. When I looked up, Ellis was standing over me. His face was pale, his mug forgotten in his hand. "You shouldn't have run," he said quietly. "Now they know you're afraid." After that night, I didn't trust Ellis anymore. Not because he had lied to me, he hadn't. If anything, he'd told me more truth than I could handle. But the way he watched me after the encounter, the way he spoke to me, it was different. Before, he had treated me like a nuisance, another temporary body who wouldn't last. Afterward, his eyes lingered on me too long. His voice carried something heavier, almost approval. That terrified me more than the children. On the next shift, I decided to confront him. The rules, the woman in white, the files, the children whispering "Father," I needed answers, real ones. But Ellis wasn't at the nurse's station when I arrived. The chair was empty. The mug was gone. No sign he'd ever been there. The unease started immediately. My skin crawled as I paced the corridor, expecting him to appear at any moment. He did instead. I found something else. On the desk, tucked under a clipboard, was a notebook, old, leather-bound, the spine cracked. I opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting inside was messy, scrawled in bursts, as if written in panic. and the first line chilled me to the bone. To whoever replaces me, you won't last. None of us do. Ellis doesn't tell the whole truth. He never does. Page after page was filled with entries from past attendants. Notes about strange encounters, children appearing at the foot of beds, figures moving in the reflections of windows, voices whispering from vents, and over, warnings about Ellis. He says the rules keep us alive, but really, they keep us here. Don't trust him. He needs someone to take his place. He's not stuck on this floor. He chooses to stay. The notebook slipped from my hands. My pulse hammered in my throat. Ellis hadn't been a victim. He wasn't another trapped worker barely holding on. He had survived for years, decades, maybe, and he was only still here because someone else had taken the fall before him, and now it was supposed to be me. The intercom crackled suddenly. A familiar rasping voice filled the ward. You shouldn't read things that aren't yours. I froze. It was Ellis's voice, but it wasn't coming from the hall. It was echoing through every speaker, soft and calm, like he was standing right behind me. You saw them, he said. You felt their hands. You know what they want. They can't touch me anymore, not after all these years. But Static swallowed his words for a moment. Then, clearer. You're perfect. The lights above me flickered. Every door rattled in unison. The children stirred in their rooms, murmuring, their voices blending together in a low chant. Father, Father, Father. My chest tightened. It wasn't just them. It was Ellis too. His voice slithered through the speakers, joining theirs, weaving into the same chant. Father, Father, Father. I staggered back, clutching the edge of the desk. My eyes darted to the elevator, but I already knew it wouldn't open for me. Not now. Not with dawn still hours away. Ellis's voice lowered to a whisper. Don't fight it. They'll take you in, and you'll be safe. That's the only way any of us survive. The children's chanting grew louder. Hands began pressing against the windows of their rooms. Small, pale hands smearing against glass, reaching for me. I grabbed the notebook, clutching it to my chest like a lifeline. The words of the past attendants burned in my head. He needs someone to take his place. That was the truth, wasn't it? He hadn't survived all these years by following the rules. He had survived by passing the burden on, and now he was trying to pass it to me. I backed away from the desk, my mind racing. If Ellis was using me as a shield, then the rules weren't just survival, they were chains. And every step I took on this floor, every shift I worked, tightened them. Somewhere, deep in the walls, Ellis laughed. Not cruelly, not even mockingly. It was the laugh of someone who had long since given up pretending to care. You'll see, he whispered. By dawn, you won't be you anymore. You'll be theirs. Just like I was. Just like I still am. The intercom cut to silence, and for the first time since I'd started this job, I realized something worse than the children, worse than the woman in white, worse than the rules. The real danger wasn't the floor, it was Ellis. I couldn't stay in the hall. The children's hands pressed harder against the glass, their whispers bleeding into chants. The floor shook with their rhythm. Ellis's laugh still echoed faintly through the walls, as if the building itself carried his voice. I had two choices: follow the rules and keep playing his game, or break them, knowing what that meant. The notebook in my hand felt heavier by the second. Every past attendant had faced this same decision. Some lasted days, some lasted weeks. None escaped, but maybe none of them were willing to try. I shoved the notebook into my pocket and ran. The corridor stretched unnaturally long again, the lights stuttering overhead, the air thick with whispers. I forced myself to focus on one thought: get to the basement. I remembered something from the files, the old schematic, a sealed-off wing, buried below, where the earliest patients had been kept. If there was a way out, maybe it was through there, The elevator was dead, of course. I sprinted to the stairwell, shoving the heavy door open. It groaned, echoing into the dark shaft beyond. As soon as I stepped in, the chanting stopped. That was worse. The silence pressed in on me, suffocating. Every step down the stairs felt like an invitation. My footsteps clanged against the concrete, each sound swallowed almost instantly by the dark. Halfway down, I heard it, not the children. Not Ellis. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Right behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Rule 5 burned in my head. If you hear breathing on the stairs, do not acknowledge it. Do not stop moving. But I broke the rules before. I could break them again. I froze, gripping the railing. My throat tightened as the breathing grew louder, closer, until I could feel the air of it brushing the back of my neck. And then a voice. Low. Mail.com. You're almost ready, Ellis. I spun. But the stairwell was empty, only darkness. I stumbled downward, nearly falling, until I reached the basement door. My hands shook on the knob. It was rusted, locked tight, but when I pushed, it gave way as if it had been waiting for me. The room beyond was colder than the halls. The smell hit me instantly. Mold, dust, something metallic beneath it all. Rows of small beds lined the walls, each covered with sheets, long yellowed by time. Shapes beneath them. Still, silent, children not alive, not breathing, just remnants. And yet BCCCCCC. See, their voices still whispered. Father. I stumbled back, gagging, my stomach twisting. My shoulder hit something, a mirror, tall, cracked, leaning against the wall. In it, I didn't see myself. I saw Ellis. He stood where I stood, wearing my clothes, my skin. His lips moved in perfect time with mine, though I hadn't spoken. You see it now, his reflection said. It's not me. It's never been me. It's the role, the name, Father, and now it's yours. I slammed the mirror to the ground. It shattered into jagged pieces, scattering across the floor. For a moment, the whispering faltered. I realized then, the rules weren't meant to protect me. They were meant to shape me, to prepare me. Every command, every ritual, every night of terror. They weren't keeping me alive. They were turning me into something else. The woman in white, the children, even Ellis. They weren't enemies. They were keepers, shepherds, making sure the next father accepted his place. And if I didn't, the answer lingered in the broken glass. A dozen fragments of my reflection stared back, each one not quite mine. Their mouths opened. You can't leave, they hissed together. I gripped the largest shard of glass, blood running down my hand as the edge bit into my skin. If they wanted me to play father, then I'd make my own rule. One final choice. I pressed the shard against my arm. I am not yours, I whispered. The room screamed. Every sheet flew into the air, revealing hollow-eyed children who lunged toward me. The walls shuddered. The lights burst. Shadows thickened into grasping arms. I ran. Not up, not back toward the hospital, but deeper through a service tunnel that had no right to be there, carved into the earth itself. The children followed. The woman in white flickered ahead of me, leading, guiding, and Ellis's voice chased me, laughing, weeping, blending with theirs. Run all you want. By dawn, you'll choose.